Mr. President, I rise in opposition to the nomination of Mr. Abruzzo. I would just like to briefly state my reasons why. I would like to start off by saying that it is my belief that when a governor wins an election, that governor has the right to have, generally speaking, the team that he appoints or she appoints confirmed to the positions that he appoints them to. I believe that the governor, in this case, won the election fair and square. I may not have voted for him, but that is our system, and he is entitled to have his team around him. Because of that belief that I have voted for every nominee that Governor Corbett has put forward, whether it is cabinet secretaries, whether it is judicial nominees. There was one issue with one judicial nominee. We worked that out. I wound up voting in the affirmative. And so I believe that is the case with rare exception. There are occasions, however, when I believe it is important to vote against the nominee in compelling circumstances, which I will describe. And I find such circumstances present here. I would like to say initially as well that this has no reflection on Mr. Abruzzo as a person. I've met with him a couple of times, and I've interacted with him a number of times, and I believe him to be a very personable individual and a very accomplished individual. There are many jobs that he is qualified for. I do not believe Secretary of DEP is one of them. Mr. Abruzzo's history is such that he has no background in environmental law or environmental science. This is not the case of our previous nominees to the DEP Secretary in a variety, in both Democratic and Republican administrations. That doesn't make him a bad person. There are many jobs for which I am not qualified as well. But it's important that for DEP Secretary have someone, in my view, who has some understanding of this most technical area of the law and some demonstrated history and passion for this. Mr. Abruzzo's background is in Medicaid fraud and is criminal prosecution. He was apparently a colleague of Governor Corbett's in the Attorney General's office and has no experience in environmental background. It's been pointed out that he, as Deputy Chief of Staff, had the Department of Environmental Protection as one of the departments under his bailiwick. But it is my understanding there are 17 departments under that bailiwick, and I don't think anyone would argue that Mr. Abruzzo, just by virtue of being the Secretary, of being Deputy Chief of Staff overseeing 17 departments, would be qualified to be the Secretary of any one, just pick one of those departments. I think some particular training and particular expertise and particular experience is necessary, especially in the context of the Department of Environmental Protection, because of the technical nature of the issues involved and because of the critical challenges that we face as a state and as a nation on really life and death matters in terms of whether it be pollution, whether it be climate change, whether it be addressing all the environmental challenges that we face, especially in this time when we are expanding our use of fracking, when we are creating a whole new raft of environmental challenges that we have to deal with. We need the very best that we can find for this job. Now, that is the background and the concerns I had with Mr. Abruzzo when I met with him in my office. We had conversations in my office where I asked questions that I found, and I found the answers to those questions that he gave troubling. I told him that. We then had a public hearing where I asked him literally the exact same questions, because I thought maybe there was an opportunity for him to think more deeply on these issues, to prepare answers on these issues, and to clarify, so it's not just me making a subjective determination on what was meant, but something that would be said in public, everyone would hear, there would be a transcript, and we would know what Secretary nominee Abruzzo really meant. And so I did ask him those questions at that hearing. Now, I want to be clear. I have never said, despite arguments to the contrary and media reports to the contrary, I have never said that Mr. Abruzzo denied that there was climate change, because to me that is the key issue facing any Department of Environmental Protection secretary. I asked him in my office and again at the committee meeting, what are your views of climate change? I never allege that he said there was no climate change. In fact, he said he believed there was climate change. He said he thought human beings had some role in producing that climate change. We may disagree on the level of the role that human beings play in that, but he did say that he thought that human beings did play some role. What troubled me more, however, Mr. President, was the fact that he said that despite the fact there is climate change, that he admits it does no harm. There is no downside to climate change. And again, I just want to make sure that I'm not misinterpreting, or as he alleged, mischaracterizing what he said, so I will read it word for word from the transcript. I'm not sure that I've not studied, I've not read any scientific studies that would lead me to conclude that there are adverse impacts to human beings or animals or plant life as a result of climate change. That is what I found initially, there's more, but that's what I found initially most disturbing. How can it's not only that he said there are no bad impacts, that would be bad enough, Mr. President, but it's that he said he's never read anything. At least most people who deny climate science have the decency to say, yeah, I've read it, but I just don't believe it. I mean, to say you've never read anything, it is literally on the front page of the paper almost every other day. It is on the cover of all of our major periodicals, from Time magazine to People magazine. It is a report that was just issued by the UN of a major scientific climate study that talks about the dire and accelerating consequences of climate change on species diversity, on species extinction, on the severity and frequency of extreme storms, of ocean levels, which are now rising to the point where American cities are in danger in the next century of being completely underwater. This goes on and on and on. This is not new, I would imagine, to anyone in this room. And so what is the consequence of someone who doesn't believe there is a problem with climate change? My fear is that it's someone who believes there's nothing, therefore we need to do about it. But it's not just my fear. It is, in fact, what Mr. Abruzzo said, because I asked him, what should we do about that? What should we do about climate change? He said, we've already done our fair share in Pennsylvania. We don't need to do any more. Quote, to suggest that Pennsylvania can or should do more to address a global issue, climate change, is to ignore the fact that there are other countries as well around the globe that are doing very little to address this. So my answer is, I don't see any additional policies that I would pursue in my role as DEP Secretary to address climate change. Okay? So we now have a situation where we have someone with no background, no experience, leading to my fear of no knowledge, who has never read anything that would suggest he's gained any knowledge, that did not read anything between our first meeting and our second meeting to maybe brush up a little bit, and as a result does not feel that there is anything that needs to be done. Now, I asked about a specific policy, renewable portfolio standards. He said, I don't really know. You know, we're at 8%. Other states are at 30 or 40% of the amount of energy that must be produced by our tier 1 energy sources, renewable sources, energy sources like solar, wind, geothermal. I said, should we do more in that regard? Should we move from 8 to a higher number? And he says, I don't have enough basis of information to conclude what the number should be, whether 8% is better than 15%. Now, I don't know if he misspoke there. I don't know how 8% could be better than 15%. But, you know, on issue after issue, there is just not the depth of knowledge, not the commitment, and not the recognition of scientific reality. So, you know, I understand the political reality of the situation. I understand Mr. Abruzzo is likely to be confirmed. And I fervently hope that I am wrong, Mr. President. But I feel that I have to vote no and violate my general principle that the governor should be able to pick their team to bring attention to the importance of these issues and hopefully bring a little more scrutiny to the Office of the Department of Environmental Protection to ensure that we are, in fact, protecting the environment, protecting the health and welfare of the citizens of Pennsylvania, and being good citizens of the world as we address these issues going forward. Thank you, Mr. President.